Representative Coleman.
Thank you. I guess I have to.
Your microphone should be on.
Should test it. Yes, a couple of questions. Would you show me where the money is for the virtual middle school that we talked about? You said it's been added. Is that $700 million, 700,000 in here? You know, the question I asked you about the virtual middle school allotment.
Yes, Mr.
And you
Chairman.
said it was in here. Is it
Yes,
in that
Mr. Chairman. So,
700,000?
yes, sir. If I may, let me just let me give the context for everyone. What we're talking about is an adjustment. If you recall, the law was changed. There is a difference in funding between the middle school programs funding, which has a higher rate, and middle school grades funding. Prior years, we had a differential. Middle school grades did not earn as much money. The law around Title 20 around the middle school program was changed such that we now assume that all programs are middle school programs. There was an exception related to virtual schools where they would be middle school grades, but unfortunately in the implementation it was very difficult to understand what is virtual, what is blended, et cetera. And so there was an additional change, and it's reflected in the governor's budget. The specific area where those numbers have been added, as I say, it's fully funded. We've taken the virtual segments that were counted at the middle school grades level for the initial 14 budget, and OPB and the governor have adjusted them upwards so that they now reflect the middle school program weights. I don't remember if it was $700,000, but that's a good ballpark. But the fundamental point is that it is now fully reflective of all segments being counted as middle school program.
I guess
that number is reflected in the $133 million line item.
Well, my question is, though, they are at the higher level. They are getting the money at the higher level.
Yes, sir.
Or it's in there. That's right. And the second question: do we still have the 1 year lag on T&E and the fund you were talking about? Is there still the 1 year lag?
Yes, sir. So when we talk about the 15 budget, you'll see that there's a T&E adjustment.
Still the 1 year lag, and
yes.
As Howard was talking about, we have real time data now, but we still are using old data because we still have the 1 year lag. Is that correct? I mean, we use old data.
Yes, that is correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
It would be difficult, I would assume, Scott, because you don't have teachers hired and in place till 2 months after the fiscal year starts. So you're almost going to have that 1 year lag. No?
Well, I would suggest that for teachers in the CPI report, we probably could get closer to real-time funding than for students. However, we do have a 1 year lag. We do fund it up or down. So,
further questions? That's the advantage of an early morning meeting, you know? This side will wake up in a little bit. Do you have anything further, Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I suppose that just to clarify, I'm reminded as I was asked the question about vocational, when I said that the $133 million for QBE, the midterm, was fully funded, that includes a number of things that are not outlined in the budget, and that is typically the case. So again, to confirm, the change for vocational segments being moved up to the higher program is embedded in the $133 million. It is fully funded. Another adjustment would be for the system charter. The governor's recommendation is to fully fund the 3 new systems that have come on. They started last year, so they're in, as well as the growth for the charter systems. And that's not outlined in the budget, so I wanted to point that out. And those are sort of exceptions that we talk about year to year, and they're fully funded.
Once again, any further questions? Thank you, Scott. Oh, excuse me.
Oh,
talking about the 3 additional charter systems?
The 3 additional are not $16 million. I'll tell you exactly how much the added amount is. Yes, sir. That will be funded in the QBE program. Of course, the QBE program includes a lot of things, including transportation, et cetera. And that's why I have to sort of point it out. So to answer your question, the total amount, and that, of course, is what was already in the base of $11 million, the total amount will be just over $11 million. The change, the incremental change for the 3 schools is just over $1 million. We'll get you a report.
So we're not, this is supposed to be that $100 per student for those switch to charter systems.
For districts that switch to, that get an approved charter through the State Board of Education, it's actually not the full 100%. I said fully funded, but I think everybody understands we're not fully funded. There's a proration. So it's at the, is it 82? It's less than 100, but it's the same amount that we've been funding last year.
Representative Kaiser.
Chairman, I just needed some clarification on that. I think he answered my question. We are talking about the $100 per child, but you're saying it's about $82?
Correct.
Lou,
what's the exact amount? About sorry?
Okay.
78. No.
Do we have any projections, though, as we move toward the deadline for the schools to make a decision? Do we have any projections about larger systems that come on? You know, what the cost could potentially be?
Well, ma'am, we know that the law caps the larger systems at $4 million. Of course, Fulton was an example. Would have been, so it was capped. I would suggest the larger cost is not going to come as a result of larger systems coming in, but the larger number of LEAs that might choose to become charter systems. It will clearly be a discussion point for the fiscal year 16 budget, and probably we should talk about it earlier. It doesn't affect 14 supplemental, but if many of the systems choose to become system charter, just the sheer number of LEAs and the students they bring in will require some discussion.
That it? Are you wanting to ask a question?
Please.
Let's see, that would be, what, 46?
I think. Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
Are the new school counselor ratios in this budget, or is that for the 2015 only?
That'll be discussed in 15. Yeah, there are some adjustments, and I think you're talking about for the task force recommendations. Some of the recommendations are not fully funded, but of course they were recommendations. So when I say fully funded, we're talking about QBE. There was an adjustment for nursing, and we'll get you the tracking document, the changes specific to those recommendations if you care. But the counselor ratios, I don't believe were totally adjusted for 14 amended. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Not in either? Thank you.
I think, well, when we talk 14, I think there's $314 million of addition. So I would suspect that the counselor ratios are probably embedded in the enhancement in 15.
In 15? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Ray, we're a little ahead of schedule. You ready to go? Good. We'll move forward with decal.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, let me apologize. Our commissioner was certainly planning on attending, but since we're running ahead of schedule, just wanted to share that. I'm Ray Higgins, Deputy Commissioner for Finance and Administration with the Department of Early Care and Learning. Our budget for the FY14 amended in the governor's recommendation. I'll be speaking from starting on page 92. As you can see there, this year in the amended budget, we actually have no changes. We'll just report to you that we support the governor's recommendation. We thank both he and the General Assembly for the support last year in adding the additional days of instruction back to this current year. And we're off to a good start, and everything's on track and underway. And with that, be happy to try to answer any questions or elaborate in any area that you like.
I haven't seen lights come on out there yet, but let me ask, would you talk a little bit about waiting lists and how we're moving towards allocating slots?
Sure, certainly be glad to do that. Currently, as of the second roster, which was reported in November, the fill rate, as we refer to it, was approximately 97%. And that is calculated based on the number of actually filled slots of the budgeted slots that you all allocate, which is 84,000. So around 97% of the budgeted slots are filled. We started off the year lower than usual, which was around 95%. That concerned us deeply, so we've really enhanced our efforts and tried to get that fill rate back up to around 97%, which is what it was around this time last year. We don't have the exact data to report currently, but if you figure in the last roster's data, plus some additional classes that we've funded the last couple of months, we project that the fill rate will be around 98%, which is good. Another key thing to report this year is that the number of classes that we're funding now is actually more than last year currently, and then also the largest number of classes that we have reported since we changed the class size to 22. And the wait list is around 6,800, and that is less than I think this time last year and about the same as it was in the spring of 2013.
Let's see. Representative Coleman.
Thank you. When we were reading around Gwinnett with Mrs. Deal, you were with us, I think, and some of the teachers met with us afterwards and talked about the difference in salary of a daycare teacher and a regular ed teacher. Are we addressing that, or is that still the discrepancy? And how is that determined? Is that left up to the daycare? This teacher, the director claimed that they're losing. They keep a teacher until an openings in the school opens up. Is that true, and how does that affect? What are we doing to address that?
Well, we certainly something we're concerned with. Also, I want to mention Commissioner Cagle did join us, so he may want to share some thoughts on this as we conclude. As far as pre-K goes, there's nothing in this particular budget. The funding for pre-K is largely formula driven, and there are certain rates in there. The employment relationship actually exists, and therefore the exact salary between the pre-K teacher, lead teacher, or the assistant teacher, and then the local provider, whether it be a private business or a public school. The funding the state provides through the lottery program, the pre-K program, is driven on a formula, and those salaries are basically set in that formula. Now, from what I understand, in the next year budget, there's approximately $2 million in the pre-K program for some merit-based pay increases, which I think would probably be something we can look at in trying to address that, but it's just too early to tell.
But do you agree that is a problem for many of the daycares trying to retain those teachers?
Certainly. And as I've heard the commissioner say many times, one of the most important aspects of the class and a child's learning is that consistency and quality of a teacher and the relationship there. Absolutely.
Isn't it true, though, that the overall funding equalizes out because the private daycare is getting more money for equipment, facilities, that sort of thing?
That is true in one sense. There are basically three, let's say you use, for example, a class in three different areas, depending on whether it's a public school or a private setting, and then the private setting is broken down further into two different zones, and basically it would be metro or rural. So it does depend. Yeah.
Representative Kaiser.
Chairman, one of the concerns that we heard when we were traveling the state in the listening sessions is that there's systems that have kids on the waiting list, but not enough slots to fill a classroom. And so there was some conversation about how those systems could potentially share slots.
That's certainly something that we could look at. Commissioner, would you like to talk with that a little bit? But that's certainly something that we're working diligently on to talk to.
I was trying to let him get the hard questions out before you had to come up, Commissioner.
That's the benefit of having a good deputy commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you repeat the question for me, please?
Sure. When we were doing our listening sessions, traveling the state, some of the concerns that we heard about the waiting list, particularly in smaller systems, yes, they had kids on the waiting list, but they didn't have enough within that system to create a class.
We do strongly encourage that, something that we're examining. Part of the problem here is that some school systems and their attorneys interpret the FERPA regulations, the federal privacy laws, to prevent them from sharing names. Now, there are systems all across the state that actually rectify that and actually do share names between the public and private providers. I think at some point we may have to clarify in either contract or in law that that is not an issue, because we do have children that could benefit in certain cases. I don't think this is a widespread problem, but in certain cases, I do think that we have children on a waiting list whose names are not being shared because of concerns with the federal privacy laws.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily widespread, but it was certainly a problem with smaller systems, and as close as they are to one another, it seemed like there's a way that we should be able to allow them to share and to create a classroom for those kids.
Absolutely. This is a discussion that's been going on for a couple of years with us. Probably became more prevalent after we cut the number of classes and increased class sizes. So this is something we're well aware of. We have begun discussions in-house about the contract for next year. The contract will probably require that. Now, I would tell you that these legislators are probably going to hear from some local school systems, because we firmly believe that those names ought to be shared. There are mechanisms to do that if parents especially give the authorization to do it. And so we do think that's the right thing to do, and looking at ways to do that.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up? Do you know of those 6,000 on the wait list, how many are in those smaller systems that would be impacted by that decision?
I can tell you from urban to rural, there's about 69% of the waiting list in the urban areas, metro areas, and the remainder is in outlying, more rural areas. The reason for that is because we do have a better supply of high-quality providers, those that can adequately implement the high-quality system that we've created. Within the metro area, we are lacking. Those areas where we have the largest waiting list are the areas where we cannot find providers. So part of what we're trying to do, part of what we will do with the Early Learning Challenge Grant funds that we received, will be to incentivize those facilities that are located in those areas that are capable of doing this work to expand, and those that are not able to do that, we will incentivize high-quality providers to locate in those areas using those funds.
Great, thank you.
Chairman Tippins?
One of the suggestions that we heard, and I believe it was in our hearing in Albany, that and it was the concern over having the children that needed to get in the program but not enough to make a class. And they suggested that maybe the state look at a waiver program in the mechanism where it's dispensed on a per student basis, and pretty much let them work out the details if the children are accommodated, and just maybe have more flexibility in that.
We do allow some flexibility already, Mr. Chairman. We hold the systems harmless for the first couple of months especially. We have also granted waivers to some systems depending on circumstances. The problematic piece here is that we try to keep the amount paid per slot roughly equal across the state. There's a certain break-even point where school systems or private providers really can't make a class work because of the salaries that are needed to pay. But we're certainly open to suggestions, and something that we would be very willing to talk with the providers about.
Not Representative, Senator Wilkinson.
Commissioner Cagle, I'd like to commend you on the program, and you and I have met, and I've really enjoyed visiting the classrooms and reading to the students, and it is a great program. But just on a personal note, I would like to point out to you, I have a grandson on the waiting list in Stevens County. So anything you can do to facilitate that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Every session we do hear similar stories. I remember last session we had a representative who slept out in overnight to get a slot, and I think that is pointing to the fact that we do have a very good quality program. And certainly, if we can do anything to facilitate that child and any other child getting in, we'll do that.
I understood that the child was not on the waiting list until they found out it was John's grandson.
Senator, I thought you had a question, not a lobbying effort. You do have a lobbyist badge on, don't you? Is it?
I've got one.
Chairman Maxwell. Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner, we appreciate you being here and being ready early.
Thank you very much, and I apologize I wasn't here at the beginning of the hearing. Thank you.
That concludes the agenda items. We will offer the opportunity if anybody in the audience has got a question or comments. If you'll come to the front, we'll give you the opportunity. They're asleep also. Okay, hearing none. Chairman, do you have comments you want to make?
We appreciate your participation.
I think that means we're adjourned.